Welcome back to Monster Tamer, a 2D Pokemon-like RPG created Phase 3. Previously, we worked on refactoring our world menu into a new reusable component that we'll be using in our Monster Party scene. If you missed the previous videos, there'll be links in the video description to the source code up to this point, as well as the complete source code for this video. There'll also be a link to the previous videos if you'd like to catch up, so let's get started. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to work on updating our menu in our Monster Party scene to handle the logic for when we want to switch our monster's location in our Monster Party order. Let's go ahead and start making these changes. Let's jump over to our reload scene and we'll come down to our create method and we're gonna go ahead and launch right into our Monster Party scene so we can easily test our changes. The next thing we'll do is let's come into our Monster Party scene and we're gonna add some logic to our init method. So then that way, if we're missing our data when our scene launches or we're missing our previous scene name, kind of like what we do in our battle scene, we're just gonna add some mock data just so we have something to work with. And so what we're going to do is we're going to update this to simulate that we're coming from our world scene into our Monster Party scene, and then that way we'll have our various options that we want to test. And so for this, we're just going to do if our data does not exist or our data.previous scene name is not provided, then we want to go ahead and do data. We're going to set our previous scene name equal to our scene keys, and we want to go ahead and do world scene. So now in our scene, we should be able to select one of our monsters and we'll see that our new move and our release options are available for us to test. So in order to support us moving our monsters around in our scene, what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to add a property to keep track of which monster we actually select and their index for when we choose our move option. And then that way, when we choose our next monster that we want to switch our monster's position with, we can use those two indexes to update our underlying Monster Party data. In addition to this, we're going to want to know that index for updating our container game object's position in our scene. And so as an example, if I select Iguanodite and I want to swap them with Ignivolt, I'm going to want to move these two containers and update their X and Y values, so then that way it looks like our monster are ordered how our actual underlying data is. And so to support this, let's go ahead and come to the top of our class. We're going to add in some new properties now so we can do this. And so what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm just going to copy this here. I'm going to paste it 3 times. And so for our first property, we're going to have one for knowing if we're actually moving a monster. So we'll do is moving monster. And this is just going to be a flag. So when we do our checks for like if we hit the OK or back button, we're going to do different logic if we're in the middle of moving a monster around. Next, we're going to go ahead and have our monster to be moved index. And this will be the index of the monster we select that we want to move. And then that way it doesn't collide with our selective active monster index. And so for this type, that's going to be a number. And then finally, we're going to have our monster containers. And so for this is just going to be our phaser, our game objects, and it's going to be a containers. And it's going to go ahead and be an array of those. So then what we'll do is we'll come down to our init method, we'll add in our default values. So we'll do this is moving monster, we'll set it to false. We'll do our monster to be moved index. We're gonna go ahead and set that equal to undefined. And then for our monster containers, this will just be a new array. So the first thing we'll do is we'll come down to where we actually create our monsters. And when we create our monster, we're gonna store that container reference in our new array. So if we come down here, when we call our create monster method, we're currently returning our container. So we just need to go ahead and store this in a new variable. So we do const, we'll do monster container, set it equal to that call. And then we'll do our monster containers. We'll do push, and we'll go ahead and push in our new container. So now the next thing we're going to do is we'll want to add in our input handling for when we're in the middle of selecting a monster. So we'll come down to our update method. And the first thing we'll do is in our check to see if our back key was pressed. If we are in the middle of moving our monster, we'll want to go ahead and set our is moving monster to false to show that we're done trying to move a monster. And we'll go ahead and update our text here to say choose a monster when we're done with that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this block of code. We're going to go ahead and paste it. And so instead of waiting for input, we're just going to do is moving monster. We'll set is moving monster to false. And we'll go ahead and update our container text here. Next, we'll want to do the same thing where if we choose our cancel button and we are in the middle of moving our monster, we'll want to do that same thing. So what we're going to go ahead and do is I'm just going to copy this block of code here. We're going to go ahead and paste it here before we try to go back to our previous scene. And then that way we'll go ahead and cancel out and we'll not run this logic here. All right, so then what we'll also want to do is if we choose our cancel button while in the middle of trying to move a monster, we'll want to go ahead and cancel that action, but not go back to our previous scene. So what we'll do is we're going to copy this code here. We're going to go ahead and paste it. And then that way, if we're in the middle of switching monsters, we'll just back out of that action, and then we'll be back to our main menu. All right, so one last thing we'll want to do is if we're in the middle of moving our monster around, when we go ahead and handle our direction input, we won't want to update our info container text. Instead, we'll want to keep our message up because what we're going to do is once we choose a monster, it's going to say, choose a monster to switch with. And we don't want to clear that. So what we're doing is going to add an if statement. We'll say if we are in the middle of moving a monster, then we're just going to go ahead and return before we attempt to update our info container text. So now that we have those checks, the last one we want to go ahead and do is now we need to actually handle when we hit the OK button when we're in the middle of choosing a monster. And so what we're going to do is before we show our menu, we're just going to do this. We'll do is moving monster if it's set to true. We'll want to make sure that the player didn't select the same monster to go ahead and switch positions with. So as an example, if I choose Iguana Knight when I go to move, I don't want to be able to choose Iguana Knight again. I should be forced to choose a different monster index. And so we're just going to go ahead and add an if statement. We'll do if this selected monster party index is equal to this monster to be moved index, then we want to go ahead and just return and not accept the OK button input. Otherwise, we'll want to go ahead and handle actually moving those monsters around and updating our game objects. And for that, we're going to go ahead and create a new private method to have all that logic. So we'll do this. We're going to do moveMonsters, and then we'll go ahead and return. So then what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and update and add that method to the bottom of our class. And so we'll go ahead and have our new private method. We'll have our new private method, moveMonsters. Go ahead and just update that up here. Then we'll go ahead and save. All right, so before we add our logic for our moveMonsters method, let's go ahead and come up to where we have our option for our menu for where we choose move. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and add in that logic. So what we're going to want to do is when we choose this option, we're going to go ahead and set our new property is moving monster to be true. Then we'll want to go ahead and store the index of the monster that was selected. And so we'll have this. We'll have our monster to be moved index. We'll set that equal to our selected party monster index. And then we'll go ahead and update our text game object here to say, hey, we're going to go ahead and switch a monster. So we're going to go ahead and do info text game object. We'll call set text. And we'll go ahead and do choose a monster to switch. Do choose a monster to switch positions with. And then we'll go ahead and hide our menu. And we'll go ahead and save. So one edge case we'll want to handle is if we only have one monster in our party, then we're going to go ahead and say, hey, we can't actually move our monster around because there'll be no one to actually switch with. So what we're going to go ahead and do is we'll go ahead and add that logic. So we'll do if this monsters.length is less than or equal to 1, then we're just going to go ahead and update our text to have a different message. So let's just copy this, go ahead and paste it. And so we're just going to say cannot move monster. And then we'll go ahead and have the player provide input. So we'll do this. We're going to go ahead and do waiting for input. We're going to set that equal to true, and we'll go ahead and hide our menu. All right, so with those changes, we should be able to test some of our logic. So let's go ahead and go into our menu. If we choose Iguana Knight and choose move, we see our text now appears. And now we can go ahead and use our cursor to choose another monster. And now we just need to actually go ahead and add in our logic for updating their positions. All right, so for our moveMonsters logic, the first thing we'll want to do is we'll want to update our underlying data for our actual monster party details. And so what we'll want to do is we'll want to update our monster's position in our array to be reflective of the new index it needs to move to. So as an example, if I choose Iguana Knight, who's at position 0 in our array, and then I choose Ignoble in position 2, I want to go ahead and move those two objects inside my array. And so to go ahead and make this happen, we just need to go ahead and store our reference of our monster that we're moving, and then just update the object's references in our array. And so go ahead and do that. Let's make a new variable. We'll do const. We'll do monster reference. And we're going to set that equal to our monsters. And then we're going to go ahead and use our monster to be moved index to grab that reference. And then we're just going to go ahead and do our monsters array again. And now we're going to use our monsters to be moved index to grab a reference to that monster object. We're going to set it equal to this.monsters. And then we're going to go ahead and do our selected party monster index. And so basically all we're doing is we're grabbing our object from our array and referencing it by our index, and then we're just updating the reference that it points to be our other monster. And so now we just need to do the reverse of this. So now we just need to do our monsters, and now we just want to go ahead and do our selected party monster index, and this will be equal to the reference that we stored here. And now that we've updated our references, now we just want to make sure we store that in our data manager, so then that way our changes are persisted. And so we'll do our store, we're going to call set, and then we'll just go ahead and do our data manager store keys, and let's do our monsters and party, and then we'll go ahead and pass in our monsters. All right, so we're going to test our changes. What we'll do is let's jump over to our preload scene and let's jump right into our world scene. So then that way we have a reference to come back to. So in our scene, if we go ahead and go into our monster party scene, let's go ahead and choose Iguana Knight. We're going to choose move and let's go ahead and choose Carno Dusk. So after we do that, it looks like nothing changed because we didn't actually update our game objects. But if we go ahead and exit out, we'll see now if we come back into our monster party menu, our monster details have been updated and Carno Dusk is now in the first position and then followed by Iguana Knight. And so now that we've verified that logic's working, we just need to go ahead and actually update our game object's position. And so what we'll do is let's jump back to our code. And now we'll just want to go ahead and grab a reference to that original game object so we can get the X and Y position and then basically swap the two. So very similar to what we did for our data here. And so what we'll do is we'll make a new variable. We're going to do monster container. We'll do ref, and we're going to go ahead and do position 1. We're going to set that equal to an object. So for our X property, this will be our monster containers. And then we're going to use our monster to be moved index. We'll grab our X value, and then we're going to do the same thing for our Y value. And so now that we have these values, we want to go ahead and do the same thing for our other game object. So we're just going to copy and paste this, and we'll have our object 2. And now for this one, this is going to be our selected monster party index, and it'll be our X and Y value. And so this is going to give us our X and Y pairs that we need for updating our game objects. And so now we just need to go ahead and actually update our containers. And so we're going to go ahead and do our monster containers. Let's go ahead and do our monster to be moved index first. And then we'll call set position. And then for this, we want to go ahead and use our other container reference. So we're going to use our monster container ref position 2. And we'll use our X property and then our Y property. So now what we're going to do, let's just copy that. And we're going to do our other game object. And so we'll do our selected monster party index. And then this will be our first object here. So now that we update our positions, we'll actually want to update those objects in our array where we're storing those as well. And so I'm just going to copy this block of code here. We're going to go ahead and paste it. I'm just going to change this to be container ref. And then we'll want to go ahead and do our monster containers. And so we'll do monster containers. And then we want to go ahead and change this to be container ref. And so all we're doing here is now we're just updating inside our monster containers array our object references to be in the appropriate index based on where we're moving them. So now if we go ahead and save, if we come into our monster party scene, let's go ahead and choose Iguana Knight. We're going to do move. We'll go ahead and swap them with Carno Dusk, and we'll see right away our monsters move. However, if we try to navigate after that switch, we'll see that our up and down is not working properly. So we'll go to Ignivolt, to Carno Dusk, to Iguana Knight. When instead I want to go up, it should go to Iguana Knight. And so what we need to do there is we need to go ahead and update our monster party background because that's what we're actually updating for alpha. So we just need to move those objects around inside that array as well. And so for that, we're just going to copy these lines of code here. Let's go ahead and paste. And so now we're just going to change this to be background reference. And now we want to go ahead and do our monster party backgrounds. And we'll go ahead and update our references. And then we'll go ahead and change this to be our background reference. So now after that change, going to our monster party scene, let's try to move Iguana Knight with Carno Dusk. And now we'll see if we go up and down, everything works. And what we just need to do is we just need to update some of our references after we finish this logic. And so we're just going to do this. We're going to go ahead and do isMovingMonster. We're going to set that back to false because now we're done. We're going to update our selected monster party index to be equal to our monster to be moved index. So then that way our cursor is right where we left it. And then we want to do our monster to be moved indexed. And we're going to go ahead and set that equal to undefined since we're now done moving monsters. So now if we come into our monster party scene, let's go and choose Iguana Night. We're going to go ahead and move it with Carno Dusk, and we'll see here our input is working as we expect, and our monster is actually moved. And so now let's choose Carno Dusk, and we're going to Summary, and we can see we're still linked to the correct monster. And let's go ahead and move Carno Dusk with Ignavolt, and same thing, we'll see everything's working properly. Alright, so one last thing we'll do is we'll come back into our preload scene, and we're just going to go ahead and change our starting scene back to be our title scene. Alright, with that brings this video to an end. In our next video, we're going to work on adding in our logic for being able to release a monster into the wild. So as a reminder, there is a link in the description of the video to the complete source code for this video, and as always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the content. If you did enjoy the video, please consider liking the video and hitting the bell icon to be notified when the next video in the series is released. For more great Phaser 3 content, please see the links on your screen now.